Hey there, viewers. Imagine watching footage that was never supposed to be made public. Dark, grainy, silent, and worse than anything you pictured. What would you do if the rumors turned out to be real? Because today, the FBI released footage from Diddy's hidden tunnels, and what's on it is far more disturbing than anyone expected. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The technician who shouldn't have been there. They always said Los Angeles smelled like opportunity, but as I stepped out of the black van and onto the uneven, scorched driveway outside the mansion, all I smelled was heat. The kind of stale, recycled heat that clings to concrete too long. I had sweat pooling at the back of my neck before I even shut the van door. The place was quiet, too quiet for a federal crime scene if you asked me. No agents barking orders, no cameras, no chatter, just the dull hum of generators and the occasional crunch of gravel under my own boots. The big guys must have cleared out earlier than expected, or maybe they left it for us tech grunts to sweep up the digital scraps. I wasn't even supposed to be there. Name's Cam Whitmore, contract technician. Subbed in last minute from an adjacent Homeland Security field office when the usual data team caught some stomach bug. I got the call at 5 a.m., and a file dropped 10 minutes later with the access codes and a waiver longer than my lease. By noon, I was standing on one of the most high-profile properties in America, holding a USB cloner and an outdated case folder. This was Diddy's place, or at least, it used to be. The infamous mansion tucked into the hills with that tacky Mediterranean meets modernist aesthetic. I knew the stories, same as anyone else. The raids had made the rounds on every channel last week. I'd even seen the aerial shots. Black SUVs, Homeland agents in windbreakers, a damn SWAT truck posted out front. It didn't look real. It looked staged, like a Netflix crime drama with too much budget. But today, it felt like a grave. A hot, humming grave that didn't want me there. I walked past the empty fountain and a busted front gate, careful not to trip on the extension cords snaking across the tiled foyer. Inside, the place was stripped, furniture gone, art missing. All that remained was the hum of electronics somewhere deep below, and a printed sticky note someone had slapped on the wall near the stairwell. Sub-level, West Server Core, take the back hallway. So I did. Through the kitchen, past the marble countertops crusted with dust, then down a spiral stairwell that smelled like mildew and fried electronics. That familiar burnt plastic tang. The server room was colder than expected. Industrial AC must have been left running. Fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead like they couldn't make up their minds. I took a deep breath and unpacked the gear from my duffel. The USB cloner, drive readers, my laptop, and the big laminated "Do Not Remove" tag clipped to my ID. My job was basic. Clone and extract data from 2 primary server stacks and log the imaging progress in the metadata spreadsheet. No improvisation, no guessing. But here's the thing. When you work with hardware long enough, you notice when things don't line up. When I scanned the panel layout near the cooling unit, the mapped rack numbers weren't matching the blueprint in my file. There was supposed to be an auxiliary routing panel, AX17, behind the firewall corner, but the mount I found had no label, just a dented chrome plate covered in what looked like black spray paint. Now peeling at the corner, barely visible in the paint, was a code. Store Vault WKN. I squatted down and traced the edge of the panel with my glove. It was magnetic, not bolted. I tugged, expecting resistance. Instead, it swung open with a hiss, revealing a narrow embedded drive array connected to a completely separate power unit. Personal Theater Vault, WKNI, I muttered. I'd heard of vault subsystems. High-tier clients use them to keep isolated media, usually high-value stuff like unreleased music or secured legal files. But this wasn't on any index. I shouldn't touched it. But I did. I plugged the USB cloner into the primary port and initiated a low-impact read. just a ping, enough to confirm the file system. The screen flickered, then it populated 2 folders. The one .footage _raw _2 to 11. 2 guest _docs _alt _bkp. And below it a string of timestamps .vid files with gibberish names. I hovered over the first. Vid _31,000 121 _2 mask _. The thumbnail auto-populated, blurry, gray tone, shaky, a stone corridor. No doubt about it, lined with what looked like dim red lights. In the foreground, a figure in a metallic face mask. They were walking slowly, barefoot, dragging what looked like a robe behind them. No audio, no label. I backed up. The hairs on my arm stood up like they were trying to leave. I didn't play it, I swear I didn't. I shut down the cloner and yanked the power. I pulled the drive and threw it into an evidence bag. That's protocol, right? Shut it down, don't explore, don't dig. But I'd forgotten something. The USB cloner was set to auto-cherry thumbnails and file headers locally. It saved metadata from every indexed file as part of the validation process. I saw the sync notice flash on my screen just as I was zipping up the duffel. Too late. That data, dates, biofilms, folder structure, was now sitting on my personal gear, just a breadcrumb trail. Nothing explicit, but enough to tell a story. My stomach turned. I sat down on the floor, right there in the cold hum of the server room, staring at the blinking LED on my laptop. One little light. One little mistake. I tried to think. Maybe I could wipe it, format the cache, clean it before anyone noticed. No one checked the tech logs unless there was a breach. But then again, someone might already know. These weren't regular files, these weren't regular systems. Who the hell labeled something WKN unless they wanted it buried? I zipped everything up fast, too fast. I knocked over a power strip and one of the cooling fans started to whine. I didn't care. I was sweating again, this time from something colder than heat. I climbed the stairs like I was being chased. The house above was still empty, still silent. I made it outside, past the fountain, across the gravel, and collapsed against the back door of the van. I heaved. Stomach acid burned the back of my throat. I didn't even know what I was reacting to. It was like my body understood something before my brain caught up. I climbed into the van and sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, windows down. No one called me. No agent double-checked my exit. No one asked what I found. I stared at the center console for a long time, fingers twitching near the USB port on my personal laptop. Just plug it in and erase the files. Just do it. Easy. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe fear, or maybe I already knew I couldn't walk away from it now. That even if I deleted the metadata, something had already etched itself in me. That masked figure. That red corridor, that hidden vault nobody was supposed to find. I drove off without turning on the radio. The hills felt darker than before, and for the first time since I started this job, I didn't feel like a tech. I felt like a witness. And witnesses have a choice: stay quiet or dig deeper. Chapter 2. Tunnel 5 wasn't on the blueprints. In the quiet hours after the raid, when the dust had settled and the perimeter was cleared of press drones and prying neighbors, the paperwork began to pour in. Hundreds of forms, evidence logs, supplemental team reports, inventory manifests, surveillance transfers, and thermal scan outputs. It all collected in layers on the desks of the digital forensic unit nestled in the lower division of the Bureau's West Coast field office. Room temperature always too cold. Coffee always bitter and burnt. Analysts always too few. That's where he sat. Agent Merrick, 30 years in, always hunched, always annoyed, always alone late into the evening. And that's where the first red flag blinked quietly to life on his screen. It came from a comparative scan module. Nothing flashy, no alerts or red sirens, just a discrepancy. The automated scanner had overlaid two datasets from different sweeps of the same property. The first from a drone heat scan taken days before the raid, and the second from the boots-on-ground thermal sweep conducted post-entry. They were meant to be identical. Same structure, same zones, same tunnels. Same heat signatures from the sublevels cooled by industrial fans, but there was a misalignment, a sliver of residual heat pooling in a zone that didn't exist on either blueprint submitted to the team or provided by the county development office. At first, Merrick thought it was a sensor glitch. Could have been a faulty drone, heat from a nearby furnace bleeding into the scan, but the readings were too distinct. A rectangular block, 12 feet below ground, lined with a faint pulse of heat evenly distributed along its edges, not consistent with natural piping or foundation structure. No insulation warping, just a long, straight corridor-shaped cavity radiating ghost warmth, as if it had been recently used. The more telling, though, was its location. It sat directly beneath the western guest wing, just outside the footprint of what the blueprints listed as the mansion's primary entertainment wing and spa complex. He requested the full post-raid LiDAR scans. He pulled zoning permits. He even searched for third-party construction filings. None. No record of excavation, foundation adjustment, or any utility work in that area within the last 15 years. That kind of silence? That wasn't normal. Especially not for a residence built to code, especially not for a property owned by someone as high-profile and heavily insured as Sean Combs. Merrick flagged it and passed it up. It didn't take long to get a quiet approval for a return. The second team wasn't large, a half-dozen agents, 2 GPR techs, and 1 forensic architect. They arrived without lights, no press statements, no follow-up briefing. Just quiet boots and closed mouths. The mansion had already been picked clean, so there was no need for theatrics. Entry was through the rear servant path, down through the spa access, and past the original tunnel. Yes, the infamous grotto tunnel that had been featured in design magazines and celeb mansion tours years ago. That one was shallow, barely functional. An indulgent swim-through tunnel that led from the poolside to a wine cellar bar tricked out in neon glass. A vanity cave, nothing special. The media clung to it like it meant something, but that was never where the secrets lived. The new scan ran for 7 hours, and when the data came back, it confirmed Merrick's instincts. There was a tunnel buried deeper than the main subfloor, cut manually through dense soil and reinforced with concrete, likely sprayed and pressed in layers. No mechanical elevator, no automated stair access. The entire thing was obscured by what appeared to be a sealed panic room disguised within the far corner of the guest wing. That panic room had been welded shut. Not locked, welded, an inside job. Someone had gone through the trouble of ensuring it couldn't be entered, not even by mistake. But the weld wasn't good. A little pressure, a portable torch, and the room opened into a short descending hallway, bare, dustless, and still warm to the touch. The tunnel was narrow at first, 7 feet wide, 6.5 high, enough for 2 people to walk shoulder to shoulder, but not comfortably. Ventilation shafts hummed faintly in the walls, rerouted and repurposed from the main HVAC system. The air was dry, tasted like iron. Black soundproof foam had been glued over the concrete from floor to ceiling. Some of it was torn, clawed at, frayed near the baseboards like it had been scraped by nails or heels or both. No signage, no emergency exit lights, just a thin red glow coming from rope LEDs installed at knee level on both walls, pulsing ever so slightly like a heartbeat. 6 doors lined the tunnel, all identical, all black, seamless, built flush into the foam padding like they were trying not to exist. Each one had a biometric panel, iris scanners, long since disabled or burned out, Some had scorch marks around them, like someone had tried to destroy the mechanisms with a heat gun or torch. They didn't open easily. The team brought portable grinders and spent 30 minutes per door, cutting and prying until each one gave. What they found behind each was a room that made silence feel louder than screams. The first 2 chambers were mirrored, square, featureless except for single recessed floor drains in the center and metal loops bolted into the walls at ankle height. There were still smears of dried lubricant on the floor in places, faint, half-cleaned. Someone had tried to sterilize it, but not enough. Power outlets lined the walls every 3 feet. All of them still carried current. Electrical tape clung to the corner. Someone had mounted gear here, mounted it and removed it in a hurry. Room 3 held more. A bench in the corner, a pile of folded black towels, and an empty bottle of something labeled in Sharpie, whatever the sharpened motor. Smile Citrus, no commercial tag, just handwritten lettering on medical-grade plastic. Nearby, they found a disassembled machine frame. 4 legs, 2 motorized pistons, and a wall anchor with a retractable bar. One of the techs whispered it looked like a modified gym resistance rig, until someone pulled up an image of a power banger sex apparatus sold in the deep end of online marketplaces. The match was too close. Room 4 was the largest. This one had no foam, just concrete, raw and cold and marked with hundreds, literally hundreds of small metal nubs embedded in a grid along the ceiling. Camera mounts. The kind used for modular surveillance arrays, all empty. Wires still dangled where recorders had been. The floor was marked with scuff trails, staging lines, X marks in black tape, places where people were told to stand. Perhaps a single extension cord had been left behind, coiled and zip-tied to a hook, like it hadn't been meant to stay. It hummed when touched, still active. Room 5 was the worst. The walls were covered in 2-way mirrors, at least they appeared to be. The lighting made it difficult to tell where the reflections ended and the room began. The ceiling had been painted black. The floor was rubber but scorched in the center, melted in a circular pattern, as if something had been burned or electrically shorted there. In the corner, half concealed beneath a loose sheet of latex, was a scorched mattress. It looked like it had been set on fire, then extinguished with a chemical agent. Foam, probably. The stains hadn't lifted. Near the bed frame was a pile of what at first glance looked like trash, until someone noticed the straps. Dozens of broken black masks, hard plastic, some with mesh screens over the eyes, some splintered down the middle like they'd been torn off in panic. One had a cracked voice modulator embedded in the mouthpiece, now dead. And beneath it all, under a false panel at the foot of the bed, was a safe. Small, lead-lined, built into the concrete like it had always been there. No keypad, just a manual latch and 3-turn combination. The number was etched on the inside of the wall frame, as if the owner had been confident no one would ever find it. Inside was a single VHS tape. Black, unlabeled. The agents didn't speak for several minutes. There was no room 6, or if there was, it had been walled over. The tunnel ended in a cinder block stop, unpainted. New mortar. No echo. When struck, they marked it for later demolition. But no one volunteered to go further that day. By the time the team emerged, dusk had dropped over the hills. The house above seemed more distant, like a memory. The tape was logged, sealed, and driven personally to a containment unit. The rooms were photographed, measured, dusted, and then left as they were, because none of them wanted to touch anything more than necessary. The report that followed didn't make national headlines. It didn't make any headlines at all, because by then, the media had already moved on to the trial date and court motions. They had no idea what lay beneath the guest wing, no idea what Tunnel 5 had hidden, and no idea that somewhere, in a vault, a tape was waiting. Still whole, still functional. Still watching? Chapter 3. The tape nobody wanted to watch. The VHS tape arrived at Quantico without ceremony. No pressurized case, no urgent tagging, just a brown evidence envelope hand-marked with 2 initials and a dry timestamp. It was filed under a temporary asset ID, scanned, and delivered to the analog forensics room on level B2, the basement level where everything old and inconvenient went to die. The room had been quiet for years. Most agents assigned there hadn't handled a real analog submission in a decade. Tapes were artifacts now, ghosts from a slower, grainier past. But the room came alive the moment the file logged in. The tape was designated item 94412Q, FT3 unlabeled. No fingerprint trace, no audio notes, just a sticker with a date, 3/11/2021, and a crude handwritten tag on the envelope, 4X Night. It wasn't the first time the unit had seen disturbing media, recovered footage from malicious stashes, serial killer confessionals, even cult initiation reels. But something about this one stuck. They didn't queue it up right away. First came the standard inspection, manual rewinding, real integrity check, no warping. The magnetic strip showed signs of heavy re-recording. This wasn't a fresh tape. It had been used and reused, written over, possibly multiple events layered across years until this final sequence was locked in. One tech noted faint audio bleed from earlier material, ghost tracks of what sounded like laughter, then static, then silence beneath the dominant footage. Unclear, unsettling. When it finally played, they watched it in silence. The first few seconds were black, then static, then an abrupt switch, a view of a narrow corridor, dimly lit in harsh red from floor-level LEDs. The walls glistened as if wet. The camera angle was fixed, mounted high in the corner, hidden, looking down a stone passage about 10 feet wide. Time code burned into the lower right corner. A low beat began pulsing under the frame. Not music, not exactly. It was rhythmic, like a heartbeat through a subwoofer. Then, as the timestamp ticked into 21:38:9, figures appeared. One by one, they entered the corridor from the left, each draped in black robes, faces obscured by identical masks. The masks were metallic, reflective, smooth, genderless, some tall, some short, some limping slightly as they walked. There were women, men, some indistinguishable. They moved in silence, slow and mechanical, in single file, a procession. Every fifth figure carried a long silver staff, etched with runes or markings too fine to read through the resolution. They marched to no beat. The camera's mic picked up nothing but the muffled thrum of distant music, warped like it was playing from underwater. At 21:41:20, the procession paused. They gathered in a larger room at the end of the corridor, just barely visible in the camera's line of sight. Inside, light shifted from red to pure white. A DJ setup flickered into view, 2 turntables, mixer, laptop screen glowing faint blue. But no one stood behind the decks. The music shifted again, electronic pulses melting into distorted strings, like a Beethoven sonata dragged through digital reverb. The volume was still low, too low. That's when the chanting began. Soft at first, a whisper behind the noise, repeating, almost rhythmic. Submit, witness, repeat. Submit, witness, repeat. The phrase grew louder. The figures rocked slightly, some swaying, some kneeling. 2 collapsed outright and were caught by masked attendants. Nobody spoke outside the chant. The DJ booth sparked briefly, static surge, possibly staged, and the lights dimmed again. Then, at 21:46:17, a new figure entered. From the far side of the corridor, walking slowly, deliberately, bare-chested, skin glistening with oil or sweat or both. He wore a metallic crown, long silver rods jutting upward like a sunburst, asymmetrical, wires looping between them. No mask, no robe. His eyes locked ahead, unblinking. A tattoo across his chest, partial in view, looked like a string of numbers and a phrase beneath it. No light but me. Analyst paused the footage, rewound, zoomed. It was hard to confirm. The face was partially obscured by the flickering lights, the camera angle unforgiving, but more than one technician swore under their breath. It looked like Diddy. He entered the room, passed between the kneeling participants. One extended a hand toward him and he stopped, lowering his head. The figure held their hand in place, trembling, before the man leaned forward and kissed it, then stood and whispered something that was inaudible beneath the noise. He turned then, facing the mirror wall, and walked directly into the reflection. The camera feed flickered, distorted, almost like magnetic interference had warped the signal. The chanting stopped. The participants began to rise, each in turn, and form a loose circle facing the center of the room. One dropped to all fours, crawling toward the mirror where the man stood. A second person followed, then a third. The beat returned, low and deliberate, this time with a bell tone every 10 seconds. The same tone used in psychological conditioning programs, Pavlovian pacing, trauma loops, even torture audio. It rang with terrifying calm. Then, at 21:52, one of the masked figures collapsed entirely. Not a performance. Their body convulsed, legs twitching, arms locked. They hit the floor hard. A low noise, maybe a gasp, maybe a scream, hard to tell. Two attendants rushed in, both dressed in dark tactical gear, not robes, black gloves, bulletproof vests, no insignia. They grabbed the figure, one at each arm, and dragged them out of frame. The rest didn't react. The procession continued. But just before the feed began to blur into white static at 21:54, 9 a.m., a figure at the far end of the circle turned. Slowly, deliberately, turned to face the mounted camera, as if they knew it was there. They smiled and raised a single finger to their lips. The tape cut to black. No credits, no follow-up, just the hard click of the reel auto-rewinding. The playback room was dead silent. No one spoke. The lead analyst, a woman in her 40s who'd handled cartel execution tapes and cult confessionals, stood up and walked out, said nothing, just left. The memo that followed was brief. Item 94,412, QFT3 viewed. Chain of custody irregular. No external time log. Video not submitted through formal evidence portal. Asset marked non-evidentiary material, internal only. Store per FIC 17C protocol in Vault B. That was the official word. But unofficially, the footage did not stay locked away. 3 duplicate copies were made the same week, quietly, by someone inside the lab. No signatures, no camera logs. One copy disappeared entirely. Another was anonymously mailed to a field office in Arizona. The third, that one stayed in the building, passed hand to hand under desks, between whispers. It started to infect the bureau. Not openly, but in that specific, feverish way that unspeakable things do. Some agents said the man on the tape wasn't Diddy. Others said he was, but it didn't matter. Because the real question wasn't who he was, but what that room had been. Ritual, party, cult performance, training. Nobody had answers. One analyst suggested that the mirrored room matched the design specs used by psych operations units. Reflective chambers, echo suppression. Another said the sequence resembled cult initiation rituals from West African diaspora groups, but inverted, designed to humiliate rather than elevate. The phrase submit, witness, repeat became shorthand across the team for anything unexplainable. Eventually, the tape was buried deeper in the system, not deleted, not destroyed, just layered under layers of classification tags. But even then, people talked. Someone claimed the mirrored room had been digitally reconstructed for a simulation, but the render wouldn't load properly, said it crashed the system, froze the server, triggered the fire suppression system without warning. Someone else said the guy who first made the copies had since taken early retirement and stopped answering emails. moved to Idaho, changed his name, but none of that made it into the report. Officially, the tape didn't change anything, didn't prove anything. It wasn't in the case file. The raid team never knew it existed. The lawyers wouldn't touch it. It had chain of custody problems, no direct link to a victim, no provable identity. It was atmospheric, background, noise. But to those who saw it, it was something else. It was a portal, a window into a world beneath the world. Not just a hidden tunnel or secret room, but a ritual space. A place where control became currency, where submission was demanded not just in body, but in spirit. A place where masks weren't just disguises, but uniforms. Where the line between performance and pain was not just blurred, but erased. It raised more questions than it answered. Why had the figure looked at the camera? Why smile? Why the finger to the lips? Was it a warning? Or an invitation? No one knew. But everyone who saw the tape agreed on one thing. It had not been meant for anyone to find, and now that it had been, someone, somewhere, was already trying to make sure it disappeared again. Chapter 4. The Assistant's Journal. The trunk was at the back of a cedar-lined closet in the Miami house, not the main one, not the walk-in display of designer suits and seasonal haute couture, the one for guests and entourage overflow, tucked behind a half-wall in the staff hallway near the laundry chute. It had been missed in the first sweep. The agents were already logging out, tagging the electronics, folding in the blankets from the guest rooms, when one of them noticed a faint breeze along the floor. Not cold, just movement. They pulled the vent cover. Behind it, a false panel. Thin plywood, painted to match the trim. It popped loose without resistance. Inside the cavity, a single black Montclair coat hung from a rusted hook. It had been vacuum sealed in thick plastic, the kind used for archival storage, not travel. Beneath it, pressed flat, was a storage trunk. No lock, just a snap latch and layers of tape, like someone had tried to keep it closed not for safety, but secrecy. Inside the trunk were 3 things. A crushed box of latex gloves, a roll of unlabeled camera film, and 6 notebooks. Standard composition style, marbled covers, the kind you'd find in a public school, spined, duct-taped to survive a semester. The pages were hand-numbered in ink, and each notebook began the same way. Property of PP. Do not read unless you clean up after him too. It took time to decipher the handwriting. It sloped in uneven loops, frantic in places, small and cramped in others. Sometimes entire paragraphs had been scratched out with force, like the author regretted putting those thoughts down. But other parts were meticulous, itemized. There were lists, schedules, even diagrams. The Bureau assigned a linguistics team to the pages, then passed it to forensic psychology for analysis. Eventually, the journals were matched by handwriting and context to Philip Pines, former assistant and logistical staffer under Combs, now turned civil complainant and whistleblower. He'd already filed testimony about the so-called Wild King Nights in late 2024, but these entries went far deeper than any court filing. They weren't curated, they weren't strategic, they were raw. The private erosion of a man who had lived too close to the edge of something dark for too long. The earliest dated entry was from August 7, 2018. Never look them in the eye when they're first brought down. That's what Dee told me, not until they're dressed and quiet. Said it ruins the ritual. Said I broke the mood last time. Said if I scare them early, they don't scream right. I didn't ask what he meant. I just nodded. The entries that followed bounced between logistics and reflections. One page would include an inventory list. 12 bottles of organic baby oil. 4 red latex masks. 3 glass vials, unlabeled from J. Zip ties, 100 CT. Lavender incense. Cradle rig clamps, spare. Another would include brief, fragmented thoughts. She asked if there was a bathroom. I said no. There is, but I wasn't allowed to say that. D said, suffering needs simplicity, not distractions. I wiped vomit from the floor after. The most disturbing entry came under a heading simply titled, Wild King Night, 44. It was dated March 11th, 2021, matching the timestamp from the VHS tape recovered in Tunnel 5. The entry read, Welcomer took her from there. 3 guests didn't wake up properly. 1 convulsed during warm-up. I was told to clean early. The oil mix was different this time. Smelled like cedar and copper, red powder added. Guest 6 was crying for her daughter. Said D told her she'd never be seen again if she didn't perform. I didn't say anything, just handed her the robe. The welcomer took her from there. I don't think she made it to the end. That passage alone caused internal debate about whether the journal could be submitted as evidentiary material. It was first person. It named a ritual. It referenced coercion, but without corroborating witnesses, and given the nature of the chain of custody, it remained in limbo. Too hot for court, too cold for press. But the horror didn't stop with that one entry. Over the next 60 pages, Pines detailed the roles assigned at these events. The witness is always sober, must remain seated, eyes open. They wear white, never speak. If they move or cry, they're removed. The judge enters last, wears the gold ring. D decides who becomes judge. I had to help him practice the speeches. The performer is selected from the pool. They get prepped by welcomer 2. Sometimes they're told they're auditioning. Sometimes they're told they're being punished. The goal is confusion. D says it opens the conduit. I don't ask what that means anymore. One page was a hand-drawn diagram, crude but chilling. It showed a rectangular room, likely room 5 from the Los Angeles tunnels, outlined with mirrors on all sides, a platform at the center, and circular notations where each participant was to stand. Some labeled P, some labeled W. One circled twice and marked G6, no show. Other entries were day-to-day tasks, nothing that screamed conspiracy on its own, but cumulatively they formed a pattern of ritualized preparation. Order more white candles. None with labels, only beeswax or soy. Request cloth masks, not rubber. Easier to clean blood. Repaint floor lines, use thicker tape. Last circle was too narrow. Book hotel for welcomers. Use fake names this time. He began to refer to himself in third person. An act of distance? Guilt. Philip reminded himself not to watch the second set. He told himself it was better to clean after than to watch during. He told himself this was just another rich man's sickness, and the world had always run on that. Then came mention of a script, a literal performance. Well, 1:52. D gave me the script to run. Same one as last spring. 5-minute countdown. Lights dim. Cue bell 1, then bell 2. Let the performers say the words, even if they don't mean them. Don't interrupt unless they stop breathing. If that happens, don't move until the judge nods. No location was listed for WKN 52, but the dates put it sometime in late 2022. There were more casual horrors sprinkled in, mentions of Z-clamps, of compliance serums ordered in bulk from overseas medical sites. A notation to test new blacklight scrub near footpath A, suggesting an effort to erase trace evidence. He made frequent mention of the welcomer, always capitalized. Tall, black coat, always silent. Might be Haitian? D said he understood shadows. First-timers listened to him more than the rest of us. His hands always shake after he walks them in. I once saw him pray under his breath before the mirror room opened. Nobody talks to him directly. I don't know if he sleeps here. In total, the notebooks covered fragments from nearly 6 years of events. Notes from LA, from the Miami estate, and from off-site rentals. Pines never fully described. His writing began to fracture in the later pages. Sloppier. more paranoid, more poetic. I told myself it was just a party, but I've never seen a party where nobody leaves smiling. I've never seen guests cry before the music starts. I think we broke something. I think we opened something that didn't close right. He started referring to the tunnels as the mouth. Said they swallowed sound. That light inside the mirrored room bent at the wrong angles. That the reflections moved slightly off rhythm. But the final entry was what froze everyone. March 24th, new girl brought from the... And that was it. The page tore off mid-sentence. No continuation, no follow-up. The next page was blank. The date matched the day before the FBI raids. No one knew what happened to Pines after that entry. His last known location was the Miami property, confirmed by a catering invoice he signed for a private event on March 22. His phone disconnected shortly after. His current whereabouts remain unknown. Some agents think he fled, that he knew what was coming, that he staged his exit carefully. Others think the opposite, that someone staged it for him, that he never left the house. As of now, the journals sit in sealed evidence containment, still not submitted to the public docket, too raw, too damning, too intimate. But the words are there, the phrases echo. Submit, witness, and now another one. I think we opened something that didn't close right. Whatever that meant, no one wanted to find out. Chapter 5, Witness. 12, Breaks Protocol. The room was supposed to be neutral. That's how the Bureau described it in their logistics memo. Non-threatening, off-site, contained. An unmarked floor in a converted residential tower near Arlington. Concrete walls softened by pale curtains. One-way glass that didn't shimmer unless you knew what to look for. A clock without hands. Just a soft tick. Like a breath that never stopped. Witness 12. Didn't give a name. She had one. But after what she described, nobody dared say it out loud. The Bureau assigned her a number, a code string, then a secure housing packet. The agent on duty, a woman from the behavioral intake unit, just called her J during the transcript. J for Jane Doe, J for July. The interview ran just under 3 hours. Parts were redacted later, not because of content, because of how she looked when she said them. She started with the wine. Always the wine. It was chilled, white. They told me it was from Napa. I didn't even want to drink it, but the guy who picked me up said it would calm my nerves. That was at the hotel. A driver in a black SUV picked me up at the airport, and we went straight to the W off Sunset. My room already had my name on the TV screen. Welcome, Miss Lell. Well, yeah. Doesn't matter now. She had been told she was going to a private audition for a brand launch, something luxurious, intimate, elite. The agency back in Atlanta said they'd seen her Instagram, loved her look, wanted her for a 2-day content shoot. She didn't even know the brand, but they paid up front, sent a real ticket, gave her a per diem. It all felt above board. Until it wasn't. I remember the second glass. I remember feeling really warm, like someone poured sunlight into my veins. My mouth stopped working right, like the shape of words didn't make sense anymore. I tried to go to the bathroom, but I couldn't walk in a straight line. Then, I don't remember anything at all. Her voice cracked when she reached that point. Not sobbing, just a static around the edges of her words, like whatever air she was pulling into her lungs was only partially real. When I woke up, the ceiling was red. I remember that. Velvet red, like movie curtains. The walls matched. No windows, no sound. Just one little fan in the corner, humming. I was naked, but my skin was wet, not sweaty, just wet, like someone had bathed me in something. She later learned it was oil, thick, fragrant, medicinal, pine and lavender and something chemical underneath, like rubbing alcohol, trying to hide in perfume. There were masked people in the room, 2 women, 1 man. They didn't speak, just moved slowly, like hotel staff at a five-star resort who'd been trained to never make eye contact. They started brushing my hair, not talking, not touching anything else, just brushing. Then the man clipped something to my ear, like a little mic, but it didn't beep or anything. I think it was just symbolic, a prop. Then they started painting my body, like with a roller brush, slow, deliberate. She asked where she was. No one answered. She asked again. Still silence. They gave me a robe when they were done. Black, silk, no shoes. Then one of the women handed me a folded paper with instructions. The paper had only 4 lines. Do not speak unless prompted. Do not resist the touch. Do not look at the silver door. Smile for the red light. Jay was led through 2 narrow corridors. One was lined with mirrors, the other with veils. She said it felt like walking through a dream made of smoke. Then the room opened up. It was like a small theater or a chapel, but no altar, just a low platform. Lights, all red, but one overhead was white. That's where they made me stand. She didn't remember how long she stood there, just that people came in, all in masks, black robes, some seated, some standing. One of them had a camera, a big one, mounted to a gimbal, professional grade. I tried to cover myself, but the robe was see-through under the light. They wanted me to dance, but they didn't say it. They just started playing music. It was like trap music, but with opera in the background. I didn't know what to do. I stood still. Then a voice, male, deep but calm, said from the corner, "Witness." The others responded in unison. Submit. Witness. Repeat. She was touched then. Not aggressively at first, just hands on her shoulders, on her thighs. Gentle at first, then firmer. They had cameras, and they whispered things to me. Said if I didn't move, it would hurt more. Said if I looked up, they'd show the video to my mom. I asked why. Nobody answered. Just one of them laughed. A little giggle. Not even mean, just like I'd said something stupid. She remembered crying, but no tears came out. Her body didn't feel like hers. She remembered the moment someone said her name, the real one, whispered into her ear by someone behind her. I think that broke me. That's when I stopped fighting. The session lasted about an hour, according to her memory. Could have been more, could have been less. She was taken back to the velvet room, given water, left alone. When she woke up again, she was back in her hotel room. A fresh robe on the chair, her makeup cleaned, hair styled, no visible bruises. Her phone showed no missed calls. The Uber receipt in her inbox said she'd gone to a spa. There was a guy waiting in the lobby. I recognized him. He was a rapper, not big, but someone you'd know from features. He handed me a gift bag, told me it was a pleasure working with me, said Dee loved my energy. I didn't say a word. Inside the bag was designer makeup, a bottle of perfume, and a white envelope. No return address. Inside the envelope were 6 photographs. Her father, her younger sister, her best friend outside a gym. All recent, all candid, and a handwritten note. Stay quiet, you were divine. She didn't fly home that day. She went to San Diego. Stayed with a friend, deleted her social media, burned the envelope in a motel sink. She tried to tell one person, a photographer friend. He said she was high, said she probably did it willingly and regretted it later. She stopped talking about it until she saw the raid footage on the news. Something in her snapped. I called the tip line anonymously. Gave a burner email, said I'd talk if they guaranteed relocation. They sent someone within 48 hours. The bureau kept her under a false name, paid for housing, basic expenses, logged her statement, sealed it. She wasn't in the formal indictment. Her tunnel, the path she described, didn't match any of the blueprints uncovered during the LA raid. But she drew it anyway. In the interview room, with a Bic pen and a whiteboard marker, she sketched a hallway with 4 turns, a split mirror corridor, a hexagonal chamber with vent ducts exposed, a circular platform in the center. Tunnel 3, the one that hadn't shown up on the scans, the one supposedly collapsed during renovations, the one nobody had searched because the entrance had been sealed with concrete 2 years prior. Her drawing matched it exactly. Even the length, the room orientation, the missing tiles. The agents didn't know what to do. Some wanted to investigate. Others feared contaminating the case with uncorroborated survivor maps. The memo from her case handler was blunt. Subject highly credible. Claims match recovered logistics. Mental state stable but exhibits classic trauma pattern. Suggest full psych eval before granting further interviews. Do not disclose internal architecture findings to subject. Monitor contact. But 3 weeks later, witness 12 was gone. Her room empty, no forced entry, no signs of struggle. Just a single item left on the bed. A folded black robe. Silk, size small. Still damp with oil. Chapter 6. Inventory list. KN34. The folder was gray. Not black, not red, not tagged urgent like the others in the rotating archive bin at Homeland's Compliance Annex. It looked like a leftover from some mundane tax fraud seizure or boring import case documentation. The kind of thing nobody touches for months because it isn't marked as actionable. But Agent Ryland picked it up because it wasn't where it was supposed to be. And if there was one thing Ryland couldn't tolerate after 16 years in evidence logistics, it was a misfile. The label was handwritten, which was strange in itself. Most DHS inventory folders were pre-printed, barcoded, and chain-sealed. This one had only a Sharpie mark scrawled across the flap in block letters. KN34, West Coast Intercept. No case number, no origin date, just that dash code, KN, which hadn't come up in any of the digital logs she'd reviewed that month. It looked unofficial. She almost put it back, but curiosity was a hell of a thing. The first page was a standard shipping seizure affidavit. Vehicle make, unmarked Sprinter van, intercepted by a multi-agency task unit just off the 405 in Culver City, early morning, 3 months before the Diddy raids. The van had no plates, no driver ID, and a hacked VIN system. But what caught Ryland's eye wasn't the vehicle. It was the listed destination. Recipient address, 2247 Coldwater Lane, Beverly Hills, CA. Occupant, TBD. Business entity, Alarum Strategies, LLC. That address had been flagged once before in a cross-agency metadata scrape, but the file had been sealed without explanation. Most likely a drop rental, a high-end property leased under a fake company for discretion. But Alarum Strategies rang a bell. It was one of 7 front companies tied through Nested Shell Corps to the same Delaware mailbox used by Combs Global Holdings. Ryland felt a flicker of something cold at the back of her neck. She flipped to the second page. Inventory Manifest. Manifest KN34, Culver, Seizure, March 2, 2024. Itemization below reflects on-site and secondary depot verification. All items logged under high sensitivity, ritual adjacent. Line 1, 6, 48 crates, each containing 12 one-gallon jugs of silicone-based personal lubricant. No retail branding. Commercial industrial sealant grade, temperature resistant. Manufactured by a private Canadian lab known to supply sexual health products in bulk to international clients. No sales record filed domestically. Line 7-9, 12 crates labeled mobility control units. Inside, steel wrist and ankle restraints with soft lining. Magnetic lock interface, brand unknown. Interior tagged with custom serial numbers traced to a Czech security firm. None registered for legal import. Line 10-13, 3 shrink-wrapped pallets marked DWRK, discrete waste removal kits. Each box inside contained medical-grade gloves, black sanitation tarps, and enzymatic neutralizers. One box had a handwritten label, pre/post, night 5, line 14, a reinforced titanium case, no external markings beyond one stamped phrase etched into the lid, "Ritual goods, King." Raylan swallowed. Titanium cases were uncommon in logistics runs unless the contents were classified or military grade. She skimmed the appended photo log. Inside the case, 4 silver chalices with snake engravings, 8 sealed tins of granular incense labeled in Latin and Sanskrit, a power converter wired for foreign current sockets, adaptable to 240V setups typically used in European boutique hotels or private yachts. 1 encrypted smart speaker, proprietary build, no external markings. Internal software locked but set to autoplay a greeting message when booted. "Welcome to the circle. Await your part." Rylan sat back. Her pen slipped from her fingers. The phrase lodged in her skull like static feedback. It didn't feel like a slogan or greeting. It felt like a line rehearsed 1,000 times. Something designed not to explain, but to instruct. There was no notation about whether the speaker had been analyzed, copied, or dismantled. No indication that any part of the ritual case had been transferred to forensics. And most unsettling, no evidence the New York task force, the very team handling the Diddy sex trafficking indictment, had ever been informed about this shipment. Instead, a yellow sticky note was attached at the bottom of the last inventory page. "Do not cross-contaminate KN34 evidence with SDNY case archive, pending internal review. DK, Tier 3 coordination." There was no DK listed on the coordination roster. Rylan dug deeper. The intercept report was authored by an anonymous DHS courier using a rotating badge ID, one typically assigned to external contractors or low-clearance temp workers. That wasn't protocol. Under standard chain of custody rules, any transport of potentially criminal evidence had to be logged by at least 2 certified federal handlers. This seizure had one signature. The second was a black smear, ink over ink. Someone had crossed it out. Then came the kicker. The final page of the folder was an internal memo dated April 5, 2024. It was sent from a Homeland Black Site logistics server with restricted clearance. The subject line was terse. Vari, holding pattern, KN34. Advise continued stasis until post-Q2 clearance audit. Not a priority for active prosecution. Risk of PR conflation with unrelated celebrity investigations. Must avoid over-indexing on media-sensitive materials. Archive quietly. PR conflation. Media-sensitive materials. That meant they knew. Someone high up had seen the contents, had made the connection, and chose to let it sit. Rylan printed the manifest. She shouldn't have. The printer wasn't even supposed to be functional in that room, but the override code hadn't been changed in years. She slid the paper into a manila envelope and walked it down to her supervisor's office. She waited 2 hours. He never came back from lunch. By the time she returned to her desk, the folder was gone. The archive drawer it had come from was empty. In its place was a fresh set of docs labeled Q3 Transport, Idaho Border Intercept. Nothing to do with anything. That night, Rylan didn't go home. She drove to a small cafe in Falls Church and sat with her back to the wall, facing the door, laptop open but untouched. She reread the manifest again and again. 48 gallons of lubricant. Dozens of unregistered restraint units. Chalices and incense and power converters. The phrase again like a song in a minor key. "Welcome to the circle. Await your part." She started Googling phrases. The results were disjointed. Some forums for immersive theater troupes. A defunct Reddit thread about underground cabal parties in LA. One mention in a leaked DJ setlist that had the words "Circle Night" next to the track "Oil and Fire." The WK tag, Wild King. It had been in Cam Whitmore's cloned footage logs. It had been on the VHS tapes folder. It had been scribbled in the assistant's journal. WKN Nights. Wild King. Someone had branded the ritual, and someone else had kept the deliveries flowing. Rylan wasn't a field agent. She didn't carry a badge. Her weapon, when issued, stayed locked in a safe most weeks. She was logistics. She tracked supply chains, transport patterns, and requisition irregularities. But she also knew what organized operations looked like. This wasn't one man's corruption. It was a system. Diddy wasn't ordering lube from Costco and praying nobody noticed. This was calibrated. This was machinery, multiple nodes, distribution routes, cover companies, encryption-laced ritual prompts embedded into speaker hardware. A network. And someone somewhere in Homeland was protecting it, or afraid of what would happen if it became officially real. Weeks later, when a task force lead finally reopened the KN-34 manifest, this time under congressional oversight, most of the evidence had been lost in transit. The speaker had been damaged during transport. The titanium case misplaced due to a warehouse fire in Modesto. But the phrase still existed. Not on record, but in Rylan's head. She said it once quietly into her phone's recorder as she reviewed her copy of the manifest at home. "Welcome to the circle. Await your part." The lights in her hallway flickered. The audio file didn't save. And when she checked her email, the folder she had uploaded her scanned documents into was gone, wiped, with a timestamp that didn't match her activity log. Her supervisor never followed up. No reprimand came. Only a note on her desk the next morning. One line. Handwritten. "We archive quietly. Chapter 8. Footage release." They said it was only 2 minutes, but it was enough. The footage didn't drop on a major network or some live stream with dramatic countdown music. No branding, no watermark. It appeared on a plain file-sharing node in a decentralized server ring, buried so deep it took 22 hours before even the FBI's cybercrime division clocked it. But by then, it had already metastasized, gripped, screen-recorded, reposted. The usual graveyard of conspiracy forums didn't stand a chance. Reddit, Telegram, Threads. Even a few news anchors tried to pretend it wasn't real, called it deepfake hysteria, even as the metadata proved it had never been rendered or filtered. The clip was unmarked. The file name was a single period. But the video started exactly the same way every report had described. A dim-lit corridor of polished stone, walls the color of dried blood, a slow-moving procession, 6 figures in robes, 3 male, 3 female, faces completely hidden beneath molded masks, each etched with the letter K. The audio was warped at first, a thudding beat, maybe a DJ track under distortion, but then the sound flickered and something worse bled through. A choir, not quite in sync, humming what sounded like a minor key version of a children's lullaby. Then came the mirror room. The camera angle shifted. Whoever filmed this did so from above, possibly a vent or maybe a false ceiling tile. Reflections warbled off every surface. You could see the robes, the faces, the circle they formed. One woman stood in the center, shaking, dressed in gold satin smeared with what looked like makeup or blood or both. She was barefoot and crying, not wailing, crying like she'd already screamed too much to do anything else. Her knees were bruised. Her face was turned toward the floor. Then, the whisper. "If you don't obey, we make a lesson of you. The Wild King always watches." The voice wasn't booming. It wasn't a threat screamed across the room. It was a breath caught on microphone, so close it must have come from behind the camera. Like someone had leaned in just enough for it to catch. Then the camera jolted, shook violently, and for a second you saw him. The crown. Silver rods bent upward, fused to a skull cap of gleaming metal. The skin beneath was slicked with oil. His eyes, if they were his, were closed. But he moved with purpose. That was the end of the video. 2 minutes and 8 seconds. That's all it took to shatter whatever mask remained. Inside MDC Brooklyn, the staff didn't find out the same way the world did. It took a young guard named Rivera to stumble on it first. His cousin had forwarded him a file dump that morning. No explanation, just a link with a skull emoji and the words, "Yo, it's him." Rivera had watched it twice. Not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't believe it. He worked the G-Unit tier, top floor, special containment. He knew what Diddy looked like under stress. He knew the twitch in his eyes, the pacing that started around 3 a.m. every other night. But after the footage dropped, Diddy didn't pace. He sat still, stone still, for hours. When they brought lunch, he didn't speak. Didn't blink, just stared at the metal slit in the door like it was going to open into something far worse. Later that evening, screams echoed down the hall. He had torn his sheets into strips, woven them into thick cords, and stuffed them into the ceiling vents. When Rivera tried to intervene, Diddy launched himself at the plexiglass barrier and screamed, turn it off, over and over again. The camera in the corner kept rolling, catching the precise moment he slammed his fist into his own temple hard enough to draw blood. That night, 4 guards had to restrain him. He was sedated, temporarily. But sedation didn't fix what was already broken. Over the next 72 hours, Diddy stopped eating. His body, already leaner from weeks of barely touching commissary food, began to hollow. He refused water from plastic cups. He refused medicine. The psychiatrist on call noted symptoms of acute dissociation and transparanoid ideation. He was moved to a suicide prevention tier, but that didn't stop him from talking. Constantly. They weren't supposed to know about the tunnels, he kept muttering. They weren't supposed to know about the tunnels. The phrase was written into his intake log 13 times in one day. Meanwhile, things outside were unraveling too. 2 FBI agents, both on the initial LA raid, were reassigned within 24 hours of the footage leak. No explanation, no press release. Their names disappeared from internal directories by Friday. A third, listed only as a liaison with Homeland for Digital Forensics, quietly filed for retirement. And one of Diddy's defense lawyers, the third to rotate in since indictment, quit mid-week, citing client unmanageability and exposure to traumatizing material. It was the phrase traumatizing material that lit up the prosecutor's inbox. A federal oversight committee formed the next morning. The trial date, originally slated for May, was moved up. Someone somewhere wanted this done before summer. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. On a gray Thursday afternoon, Cam Whitmore returned home from his temp job at a local cable routing office. His phone was pinging non-stop, old friends asking if he'd seen the leak. But he ignored it. He knew what was coming. He'd known the minute the static line appeared in his clone buffer back in LA, the minute he yanked the USB and threw up in the parking lot, like his body already understood what his brain couldn't process. What he didn't expect was the package. No return address, no stamp, just a plain white envelope slipped through the mail slot sometime after noon. Inside, a small box wrapped in brown butcher paper, sealed with clear tape. Inside that, a metal ring of keys, 5 in total. Each key was different. One had a leather tag that read WK3. Another had a number etched into the head, 44. One was rusted, shaped like it belonged to an old European gatehouse. Another was brand new, still with the plastic mold edge intact. The last was a flat magnetic fob, blank and unmarked. Beneath the keys was a photograph. It was a house, brand new, still under construction. Framed wood siding, gravel driveway, 2 window holes with no glass yet. It was somewhere rural, no city in the background, no skyline. Just flat land, a split tree line in the distance, and a billboard off to the right that had been smudged out by hand with a Sharpie. On the back of the photo, one line, written in black ink. The tunnels were only the start. Cam dropped the box. His hands were shaking again. He hadn't shaken like that since the night he saw the first still image. The one with the woman in the mask. Outside, a car passed slowly, too slowly. He moved away from the window. Later that night, he opened the drawer beneath his bed and took out the personal hard drive, the one he'd promised himself he'd destroy, the one with the metadata logs. It blinked once when he plugged it in, and the screen lit up with a single new file. No date, no extension, just a name. For Cam. The cursor blinked. He didn't open it. He just sat there, in the dark, knowing now that it hadn't ended, that the leak was only the beginning, that whatever lived in those tunnels, whatever called itself King, wasn't just hiding anymore. It had eyes. It had plans. And it remembered.